The millionaire's daughter lay motionless on the cold marble floor, her tiny hands limp, her eyes half open as if caught between fear and wonder. Beside her, the young black maid trembled, clutching something small, dark, and moving. "Clara, what have you done?" the butler stammered, his voice barely more than a whisper. Heavy footsteps thundered through the golden halls as Mr. Daniel Lockwood burst into the room, his polished shoes sliding slightly on the glossy floor. Panic carved deep lines across his face. "What happened to my daughter?" he shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of terror. Clara's lips quivered, her eyes wide with both fear and disbelief. "I didn't hurt her, sir. I swear I was only trying to help." Her voice was soft, trembling like a candle's flame in a storm. The air grew thick with silence, heavy and suffocating. The grand chandelier above flickered, scattering fractured light across the walls, and in that shifting glow, Clara slowly opened her trembling hand. The butler took an involuntary step back. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Resting in her palm was something small, dark, and alive. It twisted weakly, slick with blood and a strange, oily sheen. A faint, pulsing vibration seemed to hum from it, a sound so low it was almost imagined. The object looked like some unnatural cross between an insect and a leech, its tiny limbs curling and uncurling as if searching for a new host. For a moment, no one moved. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner grew deafening, every second stretching longer than the last. The butler's mouth opened, but no words came out. Daniel's gaze darted from Clara's shaking hand to his daughter's pale face. He could see her chest rise and fall faintly, but her stillness terrified him. "Get the doctor," he barked, though his voice trembled. "Now!" The butler stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the ornate rug as he rushed out of the room. Daniel dropped to his knees beside his daughter, his expensive suit brushing against the marble. "Lily, sweetheart, please," he whispered, his hands hovering above her as if afraid to touch her fragile body. Clara's tears fell onto the marble, tiny splashes echoing like raindrops in the cavernous silence. "It came out of her ear, sir," she murmured, unable to tear her eyes away from the writhing thing. "I saw her crying and she was bleeding. I thought I should help." Daniel's eyes darted to her, fury and disbelief battling in his expression. "You touched her?" His voice broke on the last word. "I had to," Clara whispered, her voice cracking. It was inside her. The strange creature twitched one last time, then went still, curling in on itself like burnt paper. The faint hum stopped. The silence that followed was so profound it pressed against the walls, and then a sound. Impossibly soft, yet sharp enough to cut through the quiet. A whimper. Daniel froze. His eyes widened as he turned back to Lily. Her lips parted, trembling slightly. Her throat moved as if she were trying to form a word. "But, Papa!" The word was barely more than breath, a fragile exhalation. But Daniel heard it. He heard it. His vision blurred as tears filled his eyes. For 6 years he had dreamed of this sound, the voice of his daughter. The mansion that had known nothing but silence suddenly felt alive with the impossible. Dear viewers, this is not just a story about money or miracles. It's about faith, love, and a moment that defied science. The millionaire's daughter was born deaf, but when a young black maid touched her ear, the impossible happened. Stay with me till the end, because what you're about to hear will touch your heart, Clara gasped, covering her mouth as the realization struck. The child who had never spoken, who had never heard, had just called out. Daniel gathered Lily into his arms, sobbing into her hair. "My God," he whispered, trembling. "You can hear me. You can hear me." The butler returned with the doctor, breathless, but no one spoke. They could only watch the impossible unfold. Lily blinked, tears glistening in her eyes as she looked between her father and Clara. The strange dark thing lay forgotten on the marble, a lifeless reminder of the mystery that had haunted them all. And in that room, for the first time in 6 years, sound returned to the Lockwood mansion, not from instruments or machines, but from a child's voice and a father's cry. To understand this moment, we must return to where silence began. Morning light spilled through the towering arched windows of Lockwood Mansion, bathing the marble floors in a cold, sterile glow. The house was a monument to wealth, golden frames, crystal chandeliers, endless hallways lined with portraits of stern ancestors. Every corner whispered of prestige, yet beneath its grandeur the air felt hollow. The Lockwood estate was not a home. It was a museum of memories and grief, echoing with footsteps but never laughter. At its heart lived Daniel Lockwood, a man both admired and pitied. His fortune was vast, his influence unquestioned, but his eyes told another story. They were the eyes of someone who had lost everything money couldn't buy. 6 years ago, his wife, Evelyn, had died giving birth to their only daughter, Lily. Since that day, Daniel's world had narrowed into two obsessions: protecting his child and curing her silence. Doctors came and went through those gilded halls like guests at a funeral. Each promised hope, each left with disappointment. Some blamed genetics, others claimed divine will, but none could explain why Lily Lockwood, perfect in every other way, could not hear a single sound. Daniel had flown in specialists from Europe, purchased machines that blinked and hummed, funded entire research departments in her name. He built a hospital wing, a scholarship fund, even bribed a surgeon who swore he could rebuild the inner ear. But nothing worked. Every night, Daniel would stand in Lily's doorway, watching her sleep beneath silken sheets. Sometimes he'd whisper to her, telling her stories she'd never hear, about her mother's laughter, about the world's beauty, about the silence he wished he could shatter. He would whisper, "I love you," and pretend she somehow felt the words vibrate through the air. Then, when the silence grew too heavy, he'd turn away and drown in his own wealth, the one thing that could never comfort him. Lily grew up in this world of quiet splendor, a doll in a golden cage. Her days were filled with tutors who taught her to read lips, servants who spoke through gestures, and doctors who treated her like a puzzle instead of a person. She learned to smile for her father, to draw the things she couldn't describe: birds, rivers, people with open mouths. But her smile never reached her eyes. The staff pitied her but feared her too. They whispered when she passed, believing she couldn't understand. "Such a shame," murmured one maid, polishing silver. "Born into all this and cursed with silence." "She's not cursed," another hissed, glancing nervously down the hall. "Mr. Lockwood doesn't like that word." "But what else could it be?" the first replied, lowering her voice. "A child with no mother, no sound. Maybe it's punishment." Those whispers traveled through the mansion like drafts of cold air, unsettling yet unstoppable. Servants came and went, never staying long. Some said they heard crying when no one was around. Others swore the piano in the east wing sometimes played a single note in the middle of the night. But Daniel never entertained superstition. To him there were only two forces in the world: science and willpower, and he intended to master both. Still, as the years passed, even his determination began to waver. He rarely smiled, and when he did, it was for Lily alone. The girl would run through the empty halls, her small feet silent against the marble. Sometimes she'd stop in front of her mother's portrait, tracing Evelyn's painted face with her tiny fingers. She didn't remember her mother's voice, she'd never heard it, but something deep inside her missed it all the same. On stormy nights, when wind howled through the chimneys, Daniel would find Lily hiding under the piano, clutching her doll. He'd sit beside her, holding her close, wishing she could hear the rhythm of his heart. But something had begun to shift in the house. A feeling, faint and unexplainable. The silence that had ruled for years felt expectant, as though the walls themselves were waiting. One morning, as the sun cut through the mist outside, a carriage arrived at the mansion gates. The driver climbed down, opening the door for a young woman who stepped out slowly, clutching a small worn suitcase. Her uniform was simple, her shoes scuffed, her eyes tired but kind. She looked up at the towering mansion, awe and fear mingling on her face. Her name was Clara. She had come seeking employment, not purpose. Yet, as she crossed the threshold of Lockwood Mansion, something unseen stirred within its walls. The whispers among the staff quieted, replaced by curious glances. No one knew then that this young black maid, with her steady hands and gentle heart, would soon shatter the curse of silence that even wealth could not break. And somewhere deep inside the mansion, Lily Lockwood, sitting by the window and sketching the birds she could never hear, lifted her head as if sensing something new in the air. The world, though still silent to her, suddenly felt different, lighter, warmer. She couldn't hear the carriage wheels fading away outside, but somehow she felt that change had arrived. The first morning Clara entered the Lockwood mansion, she felt the weight of its silence settle over her like a heavy cloak. The marble floors reflected her faint silhouette, and her footsteps made no sound against the polished surface, as if even the house itself refused to acknowledge her presence. She clutched her small worn suitcase with both hands, her knuckles white from the chill of nervousness. The grand foyer loomed above her, adorned with portraits of the Lockwood family staring down in judgment. She had never seen so much gold, glass, and grief in one place. Mrs. Porter, the head housekeeper, led her through the halls with quick, efficient steps. "You'll answer to me directly," she said without looking back. "The master doesn't tolerate mistakes, and the child needs gentle handling. But remember your place, Miss Clara. Speak when spoken to." "Yes, ma'am," Clara murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Porter stopped before a tall set of double doors. "You'll assist in the nursery. Keep the room tidy, help the girl dress and play, and make sure she's never unattended. Do not touch her without reason." Clara nodded again, heart pounding. She had taken this job because she needed it, desperately. Her younger brother had died just 3 months before, his life stolen by an infection that could have been treated if their family had the money. Clara had sat beside him, holding his hand until it went cold. That loss had hollowed her, but it had also filled her with a strange kind of courage, the courage to care again, even when it hurt. The nursery door opened with a faint creak. Inside, sunlight poured through tall windows onto a floor scattered with toys that no one played with. At a small table near the window sat Lily Lockwood. The little girl's hair fell in soft golden curls, her dress pristine, her hands busy with a box of crayons. She didn't look up when they entered. "Miss Clara, this is Lily," Mrs. Porter announced. "Lily, this is your new maid." The girl continued drawing, her eyes focused on the paper. Then, after a moment, she raised her head and met Clara's gaze. Her eyes were a striking blue, clear, curious, and sad. Clara smiled gently, but Lily only tilted her head, as if trying to listen to something she could not hear. When Mrs. Porter left, Clara approached slowly, lowering herself to the child's level. "Hello, Miss Lily," she said softly, unsure if the girl could read her lips. Lily blinked, then reached for another crayon and began to draw again, 2 figures holding hands beneath a tree. Clara watched quietly. She noticed the small tremor in Lily's fingers, the way her eyes darted to Clara's lips each time she spoke. So, Clara stopped speaking altogether. Instead, she took a piece of paper and began to draw too, a bird with open wings. When Lily saw it, her eyes brightened just a little. She picked up a yellow crayon and added sunlight around the bird. That was how their friendship began. Not with words, but with color. Days turned into weeks. Clara moved through the mansion like a ghost, polite and invisible. The other servants kept their distance, whispering about her in hushed tones. Daniel Lockwood rarely acknowledged her. To him, she was just another uniform in a long line of help. But Lily noticed her every day, the way Clara smiled, the warmth in her touch, the kindness that needed no language. Sometimes, Clara would sit beside Lily and place the girl's small hand against her chest. "Feel this," she would gesture, pressing her palm where her heart beat strongest. Lily's eyes widened with wonder as she felt the steady rhythm beneath her fingers. Then Clara would guide her tiny hand to her own chest. Together they sat, 2 hearts beating, 2 worlds quietly learning to understand each other. Lily began to laugh more often, even though she couldn't hear the sound. Clara began to hum while cleaning, not for anyone to listen, but for herself, for the memory of her brother and the little girl who reminded her that silence didn't mean emptiness. The mansion remained cold and formal, but in one small room, warmth had returned. And though Daniel Lockwood still passed Clara in the halls without a glance, something unseen had already begun to change. The silence of the Lockwood mansion was no longer complete. It was beginning, slowly, to listen. At first, it was only a feeling, a strange vibration Clara couldn't explain. The mansion had always been silent, but now the silence seemed to breathe. Late at night, when the wind brushed against the windows and the fire in the hall crackled low, Clara would hear it. a faint humming sound near Lily's room. Not loud, not constant, but rhythmic, like the distant murmur of a bee trapped behind glass. She thought it was the pipes at first. The mansion was old. It groaned and whispered like a living thing, but the sound didn't come from the walls. It came from Lily. One evening, as Clara tucked the little girl into bed, she noticed Lily pressing her hand against her right ear, frowning as if in pain. The faint humming grew louder for a moment, then stopped the instant Clara spoke. "Does it hurt, sweetheart?" Clara asked, her voice gentle, but Lily just shook her head. She couldn't hear the question, but she understood the concern in Clara's eyes. She pointed to her ear, then drew a small circle in the air, her way of saying something moves. A shiver ran through Clara. "Moves?" she mouthed, exaggerating the shape of the word. Lily nodded, her expression serious. That night, Clara lay awake in her small attic room, her mind racing. The memory of her brother came flooding back. The fever, the trembling, the way he had clutched his ear before the infection spread to his blood. No one had listened when she'd begged the doctor to come sooner. "It's nothing, child," they'd said. "You're imagining things." By the time they believed her, it was too late. The next morning, Clara went straight to Mrs. Porter. "Ma'am," she began hesitantly, "I think Miss Lily might have something wrong with her ear." Mrs. Porter didn't even look up from her ledger. "She's been examined by every doctor in the city, Clara. The girl's condition isn't something you can fix with concern." "I don't mean her deafness," Clara insisted. "I mean something else. Something inside. She touches her ear often, and there's a sound, like a hum." Mrs. Porter's eyes finally met hers, sharp and impatient. "You're overstepping. Keep your place. The master will not appreciate wild talk, especially from new staff." Clara bit her tongue, bowed slightly, and walked away, but the feeling in her chest refused to quiet. Days passed, and the strange occurrences grew worse. Lily began waking in the middle of the night, tears streaming down her face though no one had shouted or slammed a door. Sometimes she would press both hands over her ears as if trying to block something out, though she could hear nothing at all. Clara noticed faint red marks behind her right ear, like veins swelling beneath the skin. And once, when sunlight hit the side of Lily's face just right, Clara thought she saw movement, a slight ripple beneath the delicate skin, like something alive shifting just under the surface. Her breath caught. She reached out, then stopped herself. "No one will believe me," she whispered. That evening, Daniel Lockwood returned from a business trip. Clara tried to speak with him to tell him what she had seen, but he brushed her aside. "The child has specialists, Miss Clara. You are not one of them. Do your duties and leave the medicine to those qualified." His tone was cold, but beneath it was exhaustion, the voice of a man who had spent 6 years hoping and failing. Clara lowered her eyes. "Yes, sir." Yet that night, when the mansion sank into its usual oppressive stillness, Clara sat awake, her heart pounding. From Lily's room came the faintest sound again, that low, vibrating hum, steady as a heartbeat. She crept through the dark corridor, candle trembling in her hand. Inside the nursery, Lily lay restless, her face pale, her small fingers twitching near her ear. Clara knelt beside her and brushed the girl's hair aside. The candlelight flickered across her skin, and Clara froze. There, beneath the soft curve of Lily's ear, the skin moved. It wasn't a trick of light. Something inside was pushing outward, a small shifting bulge, almost pulsing in rhythm with Lily's heartbeat. Clara's breath hitched, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. Tears filled her eyes. "Dear God," she whispered, trembling. For a moment she wanted to run, to fetch help. But then she remembered her brother's still body, the doctors who came too late, and the words that haunted her ever since. "If only I had done something. Now." As the candlelight trembled and the humming deepened, Clara made a choice. She would not wait for permission. She would not lose another child to the silence. She leaned closer, her hand hovering just beside the pulsing skin, and felt unmistakably something alive move beneath it. The storm began long before the rain. Clouds gathered like bruises over the Lockwood estate, and thunder rolled through the valley as if the heavens themselves were warning of what was to come. Inside the mansion, the air felt thick and charged. each flash of lightning casting ghostly shapes across the marble halls. Lily was playing in the nursery, building a tower of wooden blocks by the window. She loved the vibrations the thunder made, the way the glass quivered under its might. To her, the storm was silent, but she could feel it, the rhythm, the tremor, the pulse of nature. Clara watched her from across the room, folding laundry by candlelight. She smiled softly as Lily laughed, even though the sound was one Clara imagined rather than heard. Then, suddenly, the tower fell, and so did Lily. The child swayed once, then collapsed with a dull thud, her tiny body limp, her face pale as porcelain. The crayons rolled across the floor like scattered drops of color. "Lily!" Clara's cry broke the quiet like a blade. She rushed forward, heart pounding, kneeling beside the girl. Her fingers trembled as she touched Lily's cheek. Cold, too cold. Then she saw it, a small, dark trickle of blood sliding from behind Lily's ear, tracing a thin red line down her neck. "Help!" she shouted, though she knew no one would hear her over the storm. The mansion's walls seemed to swallow her voice whole. Clara's breath came fast, her mind spinning. She looked at Lily's still form, then at the faint movement near her ear, that same haunting pulse beneath the skin, only stronger now, angrier. Each heartbeat made the small bulge quiver, the skin stretch. "No, no, no," Clara whispered, shaking her head. Panic clawed at her chest. She wanted to run for help, but there was no time. She could see the child's lips turning faintly blue. Memories crashed through her mind. Her brother lying on their dirt floor home, whispering her name before his body went still. The doctor had been too late then. He would be too late now. She reached for her pocket, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Inside, wrapped in a piece of cloth, was the only thing she had kept from her brother, a small rusted medical pin. He had used it once to drain his own wound, saying pain was better than waiting for death. She had promised herself never to use it again. Now, she had no choice. Clara's breath came in shallow bursts. "If I'm wrong, I'll lose everything." The voice in her head was sharp, reasonable, terrified. "If you touch her, they'll call it witchcraft. You'll be dismissed. Worse." But another voice, deeper and steadier, spoke louder. "If you do nothing, she'll die." Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "Forgive me, child." She sterilized the pin as best she could with the flame of the candle, the metal hissing faintly. Lightning flashed outside, and in that brief burst of light, she saw her own reflection in the window, wide-eyed, desperate, defiant. Clara pressed the point of the pin gently against the skin just behind Lily's ear. The flesh was swollen, pulsing as if resisting her touch. "Please, hold on," she whispered, her voice trembling. The first prick made Lily twitch. A faint moan escaped her lips, the first sound Clara had ever heard from her. Encouraged, Clara pressed again, a little deeper. Blood welled up, bright and thin. Then, from beneath the surface, something moved. Clara's heart nearly stopped. She could see it now, small, slick, writhing, trying to escape the light. Her stomach turned, but her hands held steady. She widened the tiny opening, tears streaming down her face. And then it happened. Something dark and wet slid out, twisting as it fell into her palm. It was small, no longer than a finger, and yet unmistakably alive, pulsing faintly, curling and uncurling like a creature born of nightmare. It shimmered faintly in the candlelight, black and slick, leaving streaks of crimson across Clara's trembling skin. She stared at it, her breath ragged, horror and relief battling in her chest. "Oh, Lord!" The door burst open. The butler stood there, his face pale with shock. "What are you doing?" he shouted. His voice cracked with disbelief as he saw the blood, the pin, the lifeless child. Behind him came heavy footsteps. Daniel Lockwood himself, his expression frozen somewhere between rage and terror. "Clara!" he roared. "Step away from her!" Clara didn't move. She couldn't. She was frozen, kneeling on the marble floor, the writhing thing still twitching in her palm. The storm outside howled louder, thunder shaking the chandeliers above them. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, and then a sound. Soft, fragile, inhuman at first, then unmistakable. Lily gasped, her small chest rising as air rushed into her lungs. Her fingers twitched, Her eyes fluttered open. The strange creature in Clara's hand went still, curling in on itself before collapsing into lifeless blackness. "Lily?" Daniel's voice cracked as he fell to his knees beside his daughter. "Sweetheart, please." The little girl's lips parted. Her throat trembled. And then, with a voice raspy and new, she whispered the one word Daniel had prayed to hear for 6 long years. "Papa." The thunder outside crashed again, echoing through the mansion, but for the first time, there was another sound within its walls. A child's voice, fragile and miraculous. Clara let out a sob of relief, clutching her bloody hands to her chest. Around her, the world was chaos. Shouts, gasps, disbelief. But all she could hear was that single, perfect word, "Papa." The silence that followed Lily's first word was unlike any silence that had ever filled the Lockwood mansion before. It wasn't the stillness of grief or emptiness. It was the stunned quiet of disbelief. The butler's mouth hung open. One of the maids covered her face, whispering a prayer. Daniel knelt by his daughter, trembling, tears streaming down his cheeks. And Clara. Clara sat frozen on the floor, her blood-stained hands still cupped, the dead black thing lying limp in her palm. Then the shock broke. "What have you done to her?" The butler shouted, his voice sharp and trembling. "Black magic! I saw it with my own eyes." Clara flinched, dropping the creature to the floor. No, it was in her ear. It was hurting her. "Enough!" Daniel's voice boomed through the room, raw and unsteady. "Lock her away until the doctors arrive. I won't have another word from her." Clara's heart dropped. She tried to speak, but the guards were already at her side, pulling her to her feet. "Please, sir," she begged. "She can hear now. I didn't harm her. I helped." But Daniel couldn't bear to look at her. His mind was chaos. His daughter alive, speaking, and this servant covered in blood. Nothing made sense. He turned away as Clara was dragged out of the nursery, her cries echoing down the hall. Hours later, the doctors arrived. 3 of them, men in expensive coats with cold, practiced hands. They examined Lily carefully, murmuring to each other in disbelief as they looked into her ear. One of them paled. This was no illness, he whispered. A parasitic growth buried deep within the auditory canal. "It's astonishing she survived this long." Daniel's face drained of color. "You mean to tell me you never saw this before?" "Not one of you." The doctors exchanged uneasy glances. One cleared his throat. "It's highly unusual, sir. We were following the recommended—" "Recommended?" Daniel snapped, his voice breaking with rage. "You charged me thousands for recommendations. My daughter suffered because of your negligence." As the truth unfolded, Daniel's fury turned inward. He remembered the endless treatments, the false promises, the specialists who spoke of experimental procedures. They hadn't been trying to heal her. They had been using her. A wealthy man's desperation turned into their laboratory. And through it all, Clara, the girl he'd dismissed, the maid he'd barely noticed, had seen what none of them could. She had saved Lily's life. When they brought Clara back, her wrists bruised from restraint, Daniel could barely meet her eyes. Gratitude warred with guilt in his chest. "I was wrong," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "God help me, I was so wrong." But Clara said nothing. She only looked past him, to Lily, sitting upright in bed, touching her ears and smiling for the first time. The mansion that had once thrived on silence now pulsed with the sound of a child's laughter. Soft, unsure, and utterly miraculous. And in that fragile, impossible sound, Daniel Lockwood's world began to crumble. Not from loss, but from truth. The days that followed were a whirlwind of revelation and reckoning. News of the miracle at Lockwood Mansion spread quickly, whispered first among servants, then among neighbors, and finally across the city. The story of a deaf child who suddenly spoke captured everyone's imagination, but behind that miracle was a truth far darker than wonder. Daniel Lockwood wasted no time. Guilt and fury burned within him as he gathered every document, every receipt, every medical report from the doctors who had failed his daughter. He stormed into the offices of the city's most prestigious medical board, the same men who had smiled and assured him that progress required patience and payment. "You called yourselves healers," Daniel's voice thundered across the polished chamber. "You promised hope while using my child as a test subject. You charged me fortunes to study her, not save her." He slammed the file onto the table, pages scattering like accusations. "You knew. You all knew." The board members fidgeted, muttering weak denials. But the evidence was clear. Years of falsified reports, experimental treatments hidden behind jargon, money funneled into private research under his name. The scandal broke within days. Newspapers printed his testimony, calling it the Lockwood Exposé. The mansion that had once been a place of sorrow now became the symbol of justice, a house that had learned to speak at last. When Daniel returned home, he went first to Clara. She stood in the garden, her hands folded, her eyes lowered. The sunlight caught her face, and for the first time, Daniel truly saw her. Not as a servant, not as a girl who had broken his rules, but as the woman who had given him back his daughter, Clara. He said softly, voice unsteady, "I owe you everything. I cannot undo my blindness, but I can make it right. You'll have anything you wish. Money, a home, a future." Clara shook her head gently. "I don't need anything, sir," she said. "Just promise me you'll love her. Truly love her as she is." Inside the house, Lily's laughter floated through the open window. Soft, uncertain, beautiful. She was practicing words now, shyly calling for the people she loved most. When she saw Clara, she smiled and ran into her arms. "Mama Clara," she said clearly, the name warm and full. Clara froze, tears springing to her eyes. Daniel's throat tightened. For a long moment he said nothing, only watched as the two hearts he had nearly lost held on to each other. For the first time, he listened, not with ears but with a heart finally awakened by love. A year passed, and the Lockwood mansion was no longer the hollow shell it once was. Gone were the shadows that clung to its walls, the endless echoes of silence that used to haunt every corridor. Laughter now filled the air, gentle, spontaneous, alive. The marble floors that once reflected loneliness now mirrored joy. The house had become what it was always meant to be, a home. Outside, the gardens bloomed again. Where weeds had once choked the flower beds, roses now stretched toward the sun. Children's laughter could often be heard from the courtyard, the sound of little ones visiting from the newly opened Lockwood Foundation for Children with Hearing Loss. Daniel had poured his fortune into it, determined that no child would suffer as Lily had, that no parent would be blinded by false hope as he once was, and at the heart of it all was Clara. No longer a maid, she now ran the Foundation's care program, her compassion touching every child who walked through its doors. She wore no fine clothes, no jewels, but she carried something rarer, quiet dignity. Wherever she went, people spoke of her not with awe, but with gratitude. Inside the mansion, the air hummed with a different kind of music. Lily sat at the piano in the parlor, her fingers pressing the keys with gentle care. The melody was soft, uncertain at times, but beautiful, because it was hers. She tilted her head as she played, listening to each note, her lips curving into a shy smile when she got it right. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching her with eyes that still filled easily with tears. The pride he felt wasn't born of wealth or legacy anymore. It was born of the simple miracle of sound. He stepped closer, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder as her song faded into the warm hush of the evening. "She's getting better every day," Clara said from behind him, her voice calm and proud. Daniel nodded, his gaze never leaving Lily. "It's not the sound I treasure," he said softly. "It's the silence we've overcome." The three of them stood together as the sun sank behind the hills, its light spilling like gold across the polished piano. For the first time, there was no emptiness in the Lockwood home, only peace. And as Lily began to play again, her small voice rose to join the melody, filling the mansion with music and love. Some miracles are not born from heaven. They're born from human hands brave enough to care.